Hello friends, welcome to our YouTube channel. Today we are discussing about the secure architecture and design practices for web-based applications. Agenda: what is security architecture and design? Why security architecture and design? Benefit of the security architecture and design. Prerequisite to execute the security architecture and design practices. Reference standards for the security architecture and design. Deliverables in the security architecture and design, security architecture and design considerations, finally conclusion. This agenda we can discuss today. Okay, what is security architecture and design in product development lifecycle? It is one of the security practice and it describes how security controls shall be implemented in the product. Why security architecture and design is needed? This is one of the preliminary assessment to describe the security controls and implementation for the product. Benefit of the security architecture and design. Security controls and implementation shall be documented. It provides guidelines to the architect and development team. This is one of the artifacts to achieve product end-to-end security. Prerequisite. Security requirements. High-level design document is the prerequisite. Reference standards. OWASP Secure Architecture and Design Guidelines, NIST Security Controls. Deliverables in Security Architecture and Design. Security Architecture and Design Guidelines or Security Design Patterns or Security Design Rules. This is the outcome from the Secure Design and Architect Assessment. Secure Architecture Design Consideration. When we want to create a security architecture and design guidelines for the web-based application, at least these inputs we need to consider and we need to create the architect and design guidelines accordingly. The first consideration, deployment. The web application where we need to deploy, maybe the cloud-based deployment or any separate VM-based deployment, that requirements we need to understand. And the application is containerized or non-containerized application. That also one of the input we need to get. The application accessible through internet or intranet. The trust boundary we need to analyze. Then the first module, the authentication. Authentication, how the application shall handle. The first option may be single sign-on and it is centralized, or username password based authentication, or any multi-factor authentication is required. The authentication related inputs we need to get to create design architect practices for the authentication. Then the application services and password management. The application have multiple backend services including database or backend APIs. So there will be multiple APIs and services sometimes. The backend passwords, how we need to store. Using any password manager, we need to store within the application or outside application, that may be in the Linux kernel or any kernel OS. We want to store this DB password and other services password securely. Sometimes the third party service based storage also we need to do, right? Like vault password storage. Sometimes if this is deployed in cloud, secret managers will be there. So using the secret managers also we can store the passwords. Sometimes the password storing with the encrypt and salt in the configuration file. This input thoroughly we need to understand. Based on that, the application services password policies we can create accordingly. Okay, authorization, user access controls. User access controls, how we need to implement using the IAM or API level access controls or any role based access controls. These requirements also thoroughly we need to understand how we need to implement these guidelines we need to provide in the authorization section. Session management, like a session ID creation or token creation, token timeout, token renew, ideal session timeout in between the web server and web client. So these requirements and these guidelines we need to understand and we need to provide in the guidelines. Server side input validation, also client side input validation, how we need to do for the data validation, file validation, the filtering, sanitization of the input and output. All these requirements we need to understand, and we need to create the guidelines for the input validation also. Secure configuration, HTTP header configurations like HSTS, CSP, CORS, XFrame, XContent, XSS protection, which HTTP methods we need to define. So these configurations we need to understand, and we need to create guidelines for these configurations also. Secure logging, log files, log levels, configuration, log print, what data the logs should print. So these aspects, the security related requirements we need to understand, and we need to create the guidelines for the secure logging. Third party components, secure components and libraries, external dependencies and its communication. These requirements we need to understand, and we need to create the architecture guidelines for these modules. Cryptographic and keys requirements, secure version of cryptographic libraries, keys, secure encryption algorithms, hashing algorithms, keys rotation, key generation, key randomness. These requirements we need to understand. Also, when we implement the TLS certificate, how we need to handle these certificates, all these aspects we need to understand, and we need to create the requirements. Then data in transit and data in rest. When we deliver any confidential data over the network, how we want to encrypt, either in the payload level encryption or using strong TLS certificate. These requirements we need to understand. We need to create the secure architecture and design rules. Then when we store the data in the database, how we need to store, whether we want to encrypt the data, database related security. These inputs we need to understand, and we need to create. Then data privacy and impact. When we use the application data, that may be in the transit or rest or in the use, all the dimensions we need to secure. We need to create the design rules to achieve end-to-end security for the data privacy. Continuous monitoring and upgradation. When we deploy the environment, the production system continuously we need to monitor, and we need to upgrade the components, and we need to fix the vulnerabilities. These guidelines also we need to provide when we create the design architecture document. Okay, conclusion. Security architecture and design guidelines shall be followed when we develop any web-based applications. Based on the rules, architect and development team can follow, and they can implement required security for the applications. This is the high-level input about the security architecture and design practices. I will give you a practical demo also in coming sessions. With this content, I am ending this discussion. I will see you in next session. Bye.